The little black girl reached the biker near the container rows while a dark truck followed her for hours. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. This is a story that begins in the most unexpected way. A young black girl, no more than 10 years old, her small face streaked with tears, was running down a dimly lit alley. The cool night air hit her bare arms as she stumbled, each step growing heavier. Behind her, the rumbling of a dark truck, a menacing presence that had followed her for hours, still echoed in her ears. The truck had been tailing her for miles, its headlights blinding, its engine growling with an unsettling promise of something far worse. She had tried to outrun it, weaving through back alleys, darting through narrow streets, but it kept coming. It had been hours. She didn't know where to turn anymore. Her heart raced, fear choking her chest as she glanced back once more, seeing the truck closing in on her. Desperation gripped her, and she couldn't run any longer. Just when she thought she couldn't take another step, she saw them. A group of bikers, parked near the container rows, their bikes lined up in formation like a wall of steel and leather. Her breath caught in her throat as she made her way toward them. She had heard of them, the tough men and women who rode through the streets with a sense of power and authority. Some called them rebels, others feared them, but to her, they were her last hope. The bikers stood together, their faces hard, their posture strong. One of them, a tall man with a weathered face and a dark leather vest, looked up just as she approached. His eyes narrowed, noticing the girl running toward him, panic in her eyes. Without a word, she rushed up to him, grabbing his sleeve. "Please," she gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please help me. They're after me. I don't know what to do." The biker studied her for a moment, taking in her frantic state, her tear-streaked face, and her bare, bloodied feet. Then, without hesitation, he nodded. "You're safe now," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We'll take care of this." As the girl stepped back, the other bikers gathered around, exchanging looks. They didn't need words. They understood. This wasn't just a child in trouble. This was something bigger, something that needed to be stopped. The girl, still trembling, glanced back at the truck, now idling a few hundred feet away. She had no idea who was in it, but the fear in her heart told her it was someone she needed to escape. The bikers revved their engines, the low growl of their motorcycles cutting through the silence of the night. The dark truck wasn't going to get any closer. The bikers were ready. With a single glance, they took off, their bikes roaring to life, each one ready to defend the girl and take down whatever threat came their way. The girl felt a small spark of hope inside her for the first time that night. She wasn't alone anymore. The bikers were with her, and whatever was chasing her, it wasn't going to catch her now. As the roar of the bikes faded into the distance, the little girl clung to the biker, her fingers tight on his sleeve, the fear slowly beginning to ease from her chest. She had never imagined a night like this. 1 minute, she had been running for her life. The next, she was safe, surrounded by a group of bikers who seemed ready to fight whatever came their way. She had no idea how they had known to come to her aid, but in that moment, she knew she wasn't alone. The man she had reached out to, the leader of the group, looked down at her with a steady gaze, his eyes full of understanding. His presence alone made her feel like, "You're safe now," the leader said again, his voice calm and deep. "No one's going to hurt you." The girl nodded, her eyes wide with gratitude and still, just a touch of fear. She had never seen these people before, but in the dark, they had become her protectors. She felt a small spark of hope inside her, something she hadn't felt for hours. The truck that had been chasing her was still a shadow in the distance, but it wasn't getting any closer. She didn't know who was behind the wheel, but she knew they wouldn't stop until they found her. That thought made her stomach turn. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice shaky. The leader looked down at her, his eyes softening slightly. "We're going to make sure you're safe." You don't have to worry about that truck anymore." His words were like a promise, one she wasn't sure she fully believed, but the calm confidence in his tone made her want to trust him. The biker leader gave a signal, and the group began to move, the thunderous sound of their engines echoing off the buildings around them. The night air was cool against the girl's skin, but she barely noticed. All she could think about was the truck, the way it had followed her for so long, like it was stalking her, waiting for her to slip up. She shuddered at the thought. As the bikers made their way through the empty streets, the girl tried to focus on the sound of the engines, the steady beat of their rhythm. It was almost like a song, something that filled her with a sense of calm despite the chaos she had just escaped. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the truck was still out there, lurking in the shadows. She looked up at the man riding in front of her, the leader, whose leather jacket gleamed in the dim light. He was focused, his eyes scanning the road ahead, his grip firm on the handlebars. The other bikers rode in tight formation around them, their bodies moving in sync like a well-oiled machine. They were ready for anything. She had no doubt about that. "Who was chasing me?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible over the rumble of the motorcycles. The leader glanced back at her, his eyes sharp. "You're safe now. That's all you need to know," he replied, his tone firm but not unkind. The girl nodded again, her eyes focused on the road ahead. The trucks were gone for now, but she couldn't stop thinking about who might be behind it all. Who would want to hurt her? She didn't know the answer to that, but she had to believe that the bikers would protect her until they figured it out. The group continued to ride, cutting through the city, the bright lights of the street lamps flashing past. As they reached the edge of town, the leader pulled off the main road and into a narrow alley, the others following closely behind. The girl's heart raced again as they slowed to a stop. What was happening now? The leader dismounted from his bike, his boots hitting the ground with a thud. He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Stay close," he said. "We're going to figure this out." The girl nodded, staying close behind him as he led the way into a small building tucked in shadows. The rest of the bikers followed, their movements coordinated and purposeful. The door creaked as they entered, and the girl felt a wave of relief wash over her. She was safe. For now. The man in the lead walked over to a table covered with maps and papers, the other bikers gathering around him. "We got to figure out who's behind this," he said, his voice low. "We can't let them get away with it." The girl watched, her heart heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. But still, a small flicker of hope remained. She was no longer running alone, and she knew, with the bikers by her side, she wouldn't be running anymore. As the door slammed shut behind them, the room fell into a heavy silence. The bikers stood in a tight circle around the table, the harsh overhead light casting long shadows on the maps and papers that lay scattered across it. The girl, still shaken, sat on a worn-out chair near the corner of the room, her legs pulled up to her chest. She stared down at her feet, still bare and bruised from running for hours, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't alone. The leader of the group, a man with a grizzled face and steady eyes, looked over, the papers in front of him, his fingers tracing the outline of a map. "We need to figure out who's behind this," he muttered, his voice low but commanding. "We've got one goal: keep her safe. Whoever's after her won't stop until they have her. And we can't let that happen." The room was tense, every biker aware of what was at stake. They weren't just protecting a little girl. They were standing up to something much bigger, something that threatened everything they stood for. One of the bikers, a tall woman with short, cropped hair, slammed her fist on the table, her leather jacket creaking as she leaned in. "We don't need to sit around playing detective. We find that truck, we find whoever's behind it, and we end this tonight." The leader, whose name was Forge, looked at her, his expression hardening. "That's exactly what we can't do. We do this by the book. We need proof. Without it, we're no better than the people we're trying to stop." The woman, known as Phantom, let out an exasperated sigh but didn't argue. The tension in the room thickened. The girl, still clutching the edge of her chair, felt the weight of their conversation. They were talking about her, about the threat that had been following her for days, and now they were going to do something about it. She didn't know who was behind the truck, but she knew it wasn't just a random person. It It was someone who wanted her, and she had no idea why. Forge turned to the girl, his voice softening slightly. "We're going to protect you. You don't have to worry anymore." She nodded, though doubt still lingered in her heart. Could she really trust these strangers? They were tough, no doubt, but the danger was still out there. She glanced at the map in front of Forge. She had never seen a group of people move so decisively, and yet the unknown still scared her. The room filled with murmurs as the other bikers discussed their next move, their plans falling into place. Outside, the night was still young, but it felt like hours had passed since they had first arrived in this place. Forge stood up, his chair scraping across the floor as he made his way to the door. "We move out in 30 minutes. Keep her safe here until then. No one gets out." As the door clicked shut behind him, the remaining bikers began to prepare. Their movements were quick, precise. It was clear they had done this many times before. The girl couldn't help but watch them, her mind racing. Who were these people, really? Why had they come to her aid? She wanted to ask, to know more, but fear held her back. She didn't want to show weakness, not when they were all so strong. Phantom caught her eye and gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You're going to be okay. We got this." The girl nodded, though doubt still gnawed at her. The night was far from over, and the truck was still out there. She could hear its engine in her head, even though it was miles away. It had been following her for so long, like a shadow that wouldn't let go. She had no idea how it would all end. She just knew she had to trust the bikers. They were her only hope. Forge stepped back into the room a few moments later, his eyes scanning the group. "We're hitting the road in 15. Get ready." One by one, the bikers nodded, strapping on their gear, checking their bikes. Phantom gave the girl a nod before stepping out the door. The girl stood up, her legs unsteady. She wasn't sure where they were going, but she knew it had to be better than sitting here, waiting for the truck to find them. She walked over to the table, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to ask more questions, wanted to know what would happen next, but the silence in the room was deafening. Forge watched her for a moment, his face unreadable. "You're doing the right thing. You gotta trust us." The girl met his gaze, her throat tight. She didn't know if she could trust them, but she didn't have a choice. Her only option was to stay with them. They were her only chance. The room quieted as the bikers filed out one by one, their boots heavy against the floor. The girl followed them, taking a deep breath as she stepped outside into the cool night air. The bikes rumbled to life, the engines growling like a pack of wild animals. The sound was powerful, comforting in its own way. They were ready, and so was she. The truck might still be out there, but she wasn't running anymore. This time, they were coming for it. As the bikers roared down the highway, the air felt electric, a tension hanging in the night. The girl, sitting behind Forge, gripped his leather vest, trying to steady her breathing. The road stretched out ahead of them, but in her mind, the image of that dark truck was still there, lurking in the background. It was almost as if the truck was chasing them, no matter how far they went. But the bikers had made it clear they weren't running anymore. They were ready to face whatever came next. The convoy of motorcycles surged forward, the rhythmic sound of the engines filling the air, each bike a symbol of strength and determination. As they passed through small towns and open fields, the girl couldn't help but feel like something was building up. This wasn't just a simple chase anymore. This was personal. For Forge and the others, this was about more than just protecting her. It was about standing up to the fear, to the unknown, and fighting back. They weren't going to let whoever was behind the truck win. Forge's voice crackled through the radio, low and steady. "Stay sharp. We're getting close." The girl's heart skipped a beat. Close? She had no idea where they were headed, but she knew one thing for sure. The closer they got to the unknown, the more her fear intensified. Was this the moment when everything would change? Was this where they would face the truck and whatever threat it posed? Forge glanced back at her, his eyes calm but filled with resolve. "Don't worry. We've got this." His words were simple, but the way he said them gave her a sense of security. She had no choice but to trust him. The night grew colder as they pushed forward, the sky above dark and clouded. The roads began to twist and turn, leading them further into the unknown. The girl could feel the weight of the journey bearing down on her. They were heading towards something, but what? Was it a trap? Was the truck just the beginning of something far worse? A cold shiver ran down her spine, but she pushed it aside, determined to focus on the present. She had to stay strong. The bikers kept their pace steady, the engines humming like a constant reminder of their presence, their protection. The girl turned to Forge once more, her voice barely above a whisper. What happens when we find them? Forge's eyes flickered to her for a moment before he answered, his voice gruff but reassuring. We don't stop. We face it, whatever it is. Together. His words settled over her like a blanket, and for the first time in hours, she allowed herself to breathe a little easier. The bikers were right. They were ready. They were a family, and that family wasn't going to back down. As they drove through a particularly narrow stretch of road, the headlights of the truck appeared in the distance, the unmistakable gleam of the dark vehicle cutting through the night. The girl's heart raced again. There it was, the thing that had been chasing her for so long, the thing that had been haunting her every step. Forge's voice came over the radio, clear and commanding. Get ready. This is it. The convoy sped up, the bikes surging forward like a wall of steel, ready to face whatever came next. The truck ahead was now much closer, its headlights blinding in the dark. The bikers did not falter. They kept their formation, riding like a united front. They were not just chasing the truck anymore. They were confronting it. Forge took the lead, his Harley cutting through the night like a predator stalking its prey. The truck attempted to swerve, trying to get away, but Forge and the others weren't giving up. They had a mission, and they were determined to see it through. The girl could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken promise that they wouldn't stop until they had answers. This wasn't just about protecting her anymore. It was about taking control of the situation. The truck made a sharp turn onto an isolated road, clearly trying to lose them, but the bikers were faster. They followed it, their bikes a blur of motion in the dark. The truck's tires screeched as it made another turn, but couldn't shake the bikers. The convoy stayed tight, moving as one. The chase felt like it had been going on for hours, the adrenaline building with each passing minute. And then, just as the truck tried to veer off the road and into a small clearing, Forge signaled to the group. This is it. Block it off. The bikers spread out, their bikes encircling the truck, forming a wall that the truck couldn't break through. The girl's heart pounded in her chest as the truck came to a screeching halt. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't running anymore. The bikers had done their part. Now it was time for the truth to come out. As Forge dismounted from his bike, the others followed suit. They walked toward the truck, their steps measured, their eyes sharp. The girl stayed back, hidden behind one of the bikes, watching as the confrontation unfolded. This was the moment. The truck's door opened slowly, and the man who stepped out was not what the girl expected. He wasn't some stranger in a mask or an anonymous figure. He was someone she recognized, someone from her past. The man's eyes met hers, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. This wasn't just any random chase. This was something far more personal. The man stepped out of the truck, his face partially illuminated by the harsh headlights, but the girl immediately recognized him. Her heart skipped a beat. It was her stepfather, Officer Patrick Donovan, the very man who had been the source of her nightmares, the one who had made her life a constant struggle. She had been running from him for days, and now, here he was, standing in front of her, looking as if nothing had ever happened. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she was paralyzed with fear. The bikers, sensing her hesitation, stood taller, their posture becoming more menacing, a silent promise to protect her no matter what. Forge, the leader of the group, stepped forward, his voice firm but controlled. "You've been following her for a long time," he said, his words cold and direct. Donovan's face twitched slightly, and for a moment, the confidence that had once marked his every movement seemed to falter. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but this doesn't concern you," Donovan replied, his voice steady, though there was a hint of unease in his eyes. "It's not just about her anymore," Forge said, his voice gaining strength. "You're not going anywhere until we figure out what's going on." Donovan's gaze flickered to the girl, his eyes hardening as they met hers. He had always made her feel small, powerless, but now, surrounded by the bikers, she felt something different, empowered. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone. She wasn't the scared little girl hiding from him. She had the support of the bikers, a group of people who didn't care about his badge or his authority. Donovan seemed to realize this, his posture stiffening, but he didn't back down. "You think you can stop me?" he sneered. "I'm a police officer. I can have all of you arrested for interfering with an investigation." Forge's response was immediate and without hesitation. "Not without evidence. You won't." There was a long pause as the two men locked eyes, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. The other bikers remained silent, waiting for Forge's next move. The girl stood behind him, her hands trembling slightly, but her resolve strengthening. She had no idea how the situation would end, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let him hurt her anymore. "We've been watching you," Forge continued. "We know about the abuse. We know what's been happening to her." Donovan's face turned pale at Forge's words, his eyes flickering with panic. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said quickly, his voice tightening. "You're just a bunch of criminals who think you can play hero." Forge stepped closer to him, his voice lowering to a dangerous whisper. "You're not a hero. You're the monster." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Donovan didn't respond. The bikers behind Forge were a wall of unwavering strength, and he knew he couldn't just walk away from this. The truth was out, and he had nowhere to run. The girl felt a rush of anger flood through her, and for the first time, she felt like she had control over her own fate. She stepped out from behind Forge, her voice clear and strong as she looked directly at Donovan. "You're not going to hurt me anymore," she said, her words ringing out like a declaration. Donovan's eyes widened in disbelief, and he took a step back, his jaw clenched. He seemed to hesitate for a brief moment, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. But then, his face hardened once more. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into," he spat, his voice rising with anger. "I'm still your father, and I will make sure you regret this." Forge stepped in between them, his body blocking her from Donovan's view. "You're not her father," he said coldly, "and you don't have the right to threaten her." The bikers, their faces grim and focused, stood ready to act, their loyalty to the girl stronger than anything else. They weren't just bikers anymore. They were her family, her protectors. Donovan's expression faltered, and for a moment, he seemed lost, unsure of what to do next. The truth was he had no power here, not against the bikers, not against the truth, and certainly not against the girl who had found the courage to stand up to him. He glanced around, as if looking for a way out, but Forge's voice cut through the tension. "It's over, Donovan. You can walk away, or you can stay and face the consequences of your actions. But either way, this ends tonight." The words were final, and Donovan seemed to understand that. His gaze shifted from Forge to the girl and back again. Then, with one last look of pure hatred, he turned and climbed back into his truck, slamming the door behind him. The bikers didn't move, their eyes locked on the truck as it slowly backed away and disappeared into the night. The girl stood there, her heart still pounding, but a sense of relief washing over her. She wasn't the scared little girl anymore. She was free. Forge turned to her, his eyes softening. "You're safe now," he said, his voice reassuring. The girl nodded, her chest swelling with a mixture of relief and gratitude. She had faced a monster, and with the help of the bikers, she had won. The rest of the bikers began to gather around, their expressions softening as they realized the fight was over. They had kept their promise. The girl wasn't alone anymore. She had a family now, one that would protect her no matter what. The air felt thick with anticipation as the girl stood beside the bikers, watching the truck disappear into the distance. Her heart was still racing from the encounter, but there was also a strange sense of calm settling over her. It was over. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. The bikers had made sure of that. They had kept their promise. Forge, the leader of the group, looked at her, his face softening with a rare moment of kindness. "You did good," he said, his voice low and steady. "You stayed strong." The girl nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She wanted to thank him, to say something, but words didn't seem to be enough. She had felt so alone for so long, but now, surrounded by these people, she felt a bond, a connection she had never experienced before. These bikers, these strangers, had become her family in the span of a few short hours. They had protected her, and they had shown her what it meant to stand up for what was right. The other bikers were gathering around, their faces grim but reassuring. Phantom, the tall woman with short hair, walked up to her with a smile. "You're one of us now," she said, her voice warm. "We've got your back, no matter what." The girl's eyes filled with tears, and she blinked them away quickly. She had spent so much time in fear, so much time trying to escape. But now, she had a family, a group of people who would fight for her, who would keep her safe. It was a feeling she hadn't known was possible. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaky. Phantom gave her a quick hug, and the girl felt a surge of gratitude flood through her. The other bikers nodded in acknowledgement, their faces showing a mix of pride and determination. They had been through battles before, but this was different. This was personal. Forge clapped a hand on the girl's shoulder, bringing her attention back to him. "We're going to make sure you're safe," he said firmly. "But you need to stay strong. This isn't over yet." The girl felt a jolt of unease at his words. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Forge's expression hardened. "That man, Donovan, he's not going to let you go that easily. He'll be back, and when he does, we'll be ready." The weight of his words settled on her like a heavy blanket. She had known this wouldn't be the end, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. Her stepfather wasn't just going to disappear, but she wasn't alone anymore. She had the bikers, and that made all the difference. The group spent the next few hours making plans, strategizing, and preparing for whatever might come next. They knew Donovan wouldn't stop, but they also knew they wouldn't let him win. They weren't just fighting for the girl, they were fighting for what was right. For justice. As the night wore on, the girl felt a strange sense of hope begin to build inside her. For the first time in years, she felt like she had a future. A future where she wasn't running. A future where she was safe. The bikers were more than just a group of rebels. They were a family, bound together by loyalty and a shared sense of justice. And that family wasn't going to let anything happen to her. The girl looked up at Forge, who was standing across the room, talking quietly to one of the other bikers. His calm demeanor made her feel safer than she had in a long time. She knew he had a plan, and she trusted him. She trusted all of them. The sound of engines revving outside signaled that the bikers were getting ready to move out. The girl stood up, feeling a sense of determination she hadn't felt in a long time. This was it. They were about to face Donovan, and she was ready. She wasn't the scared little girl anymore. She was strong, and with the bikers by her side, she felt like she could take on the world. Forge turned to her as she approached, his eyes scanning her face. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded, her voice steady. "I'm ready." He smiled at her, a rare moment of warmth breaking through his tough exterior. "Good. Let's go." The bikers mounted their bikes, their engines roaring to life once again. The girl climbed onto Forge's bike, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. This was it. They were going to take down Donovan, and they were going to do it together. As they rode out into the night, the girl could feel the wind in her hair, the rush of the engine beneath her. For the first time in her life, she felt free. Free from fear, free from the past, and ready to face whatever came next. The ride was intense. The girl clung to Forge as they tore down the highway, the rumble of their bikes cutting through the night. She could feel the cool wind biting at her skin, but it was nothing compared to the fear she had felt just hours before. Now, as they sped forward, her heart raced for a different reason. This was it, the moment when everything would change. The truck had been a shadow in the distance, but now it was gone, and the bikers were on their way to take down whatever threats still loomed. As they rode through the winding roads, the streetlights flashing past, the girl's thoughts kept circling back to Donovan. She had finally faced him, but it wasn't enough. He was a cop, and she knew how far he would go to protect his own. It was going to be a battle. She felt Forge's grip on the handlebars tighten as they made a sharp turn, speeding through the night like a storm. The others followed close behind, their bikes in perfect formation. No one spoke, but the silence between them was heavy with purpose. The girl couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude to these strangers who had become her family. They were here to protect her. They weren't backing down. As the convoy continued on, Forge glanced over his shoulder at her, his expression focused. "You holding up okay?" he asked, his voice steady over the roar of the engines. She nodded, her eyes wide with both fear and determination. "I'm good," she replied, though her heart was still pounding in her chest. They were getting closer. Forge's eyes flickered to the road ahead, his face hardening. The night was silent except for the sound of the engines, but she could feel the tension building. Donovan wasn't just going to let her go. He would come after her again, and the bikers knew it. They couldn't afford to wait. "We're getting close," Forge muttered, his voice low. "Stay sharp." The girl's pulse quickened. She had been running for so long, never knowing where she would end up. But now, she was on the verge of something bigger, something that would finally set her free. They passed through another small town, the streets deserted in the dead of night. The girl's mind raced. Was this where it all go down? Was Donovan waiting for them? She didn't know, but she had to believe that with the bikers by her side, they could face anything. As they rode deeper into the night, the headlights of their bikes cast long shadows on the empty streets. Forge led the way, his bike cutting through the dark like a knife. The girl's hands tightened around his waist as they made another sharp turn, heading toward an industrial area on the outskirts of town. This was it. The trucks had stopped following, but they weren't out of the woods yet. The bikers had a plan, but it wasn't foolproof. They would need to confront Donovan, and they would need to do it carefully. Forge glanced back at the group, his face grim. "We stick together," he said, his voice firm. "No one gets separated. We go in fast, no hesitation." The others nodded, their expressions hard and ready. They had been through worse. They knew how to handle things when it came to protecting their own. They were a family now. They didn't let anyone down. The girl's stomach twisted with nerves, but she felt something else too. Something stronger. A sense of power, of agency. For the first time, she was in control. She wasn't running from Donovan anymore. She wasn't hiding. She was standing up for herself, with the bikers by her side. They rode into the industrial area, the streets darker and quieter than before. The sound of their engines echoed off the steel walls of the abandoned warehouses, but the girl's attention was focused on the road ahead. Her mind kept flashing back to her stepfather, to the life she had left behind. But this wasn't about him anymore. This was about her. She wasn't going to let him hurt her again. As they approached a large, dimly lit building, Forge slowed his bike and motioned for the others to do the same. The convoy stopped just outside, their bikes casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. The girl felt a surge of anxiety, but it was tempered by the quiet determination of the bikers around her. "Stay close," Forge said, his voice low. "We move in together." The girl nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. They were ready. Forge led the way, his bike gliding silently to a stop near the building's entrance. The other bikers followed, their engines cutting out one by one, leaving only the sound of footsteps on the cold concrete. The air was thick with tension as they approached the building, their shadows stretching. Long behind them, the girl stayed close to Forge, her eyes scanning the area, but there was no sign of Donovan. Not yet. They reached the door, and Forge motioned for the others to hold back. "We going fast," he said. "If he's here, we'll find him. No matter what." The girl could feel the weight of the moment. It was do or die. They couldn't afford to fail. With one final look around, Forge reached for the door handle, pushing it open slowly. The inside was dark, the air heavy with the smell of dust and old metal. They stepped inside, the sound of their boots echoing in the silence. The girl's breath caught in her throat as they moved deeper into the building. Was Donovan waiting for them inside? Was this the trap they had been expecting? She didn't know. But one thing was certain. She wasn't afraid anymore. The silence inside the building was suffocating. The girl could feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest, her heartbeat loud in her ears as she followed Forge deeper into the darkness. The air smelled of mildew and old metal, and the sound of their boots echoed off the concrete walls, each step a reminder that they were in the lion's den now. The bikers moved cautiously, their eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. Forge, always in the lead, signaled for them to stop, his hand raised just slightly. The group obeyed instantly, forming a loose circle around him. The girl stayed close behind him, her heart racing. She was afraid, but not in the same way she had been when she was running. She wasn't the helpless little girl anymore. She was a part of something bigger now. A part of this strange family of bikers who had stepped in when no one else would. Forge's voice broke the silence, low and steady. "We stay alert. No one gets separated. If he's here, we find him." The others nodded, their expressions grim. Phantom stepped forward, her hand resting on the handle of her motorcycle, which she had left by the door. "Let's get this over with," she muttered. The girl could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. The fear that had been with her for so long had faded, replaced by something else. Something strong. Forge moved forward again, leading the group, deeper into the dark building. The sound of their footsteps was the only thing that kept her grounded as the shadows seemed to close in around them. As they moved through the halls, the girl kept her eyes fixed on the back of Forge's jacket. She wasn't sure what would happen when they found Donovan, but one thing was certain. They were ready. And she was ready. They reached the end of the hallway, where a large metal door loomed in front of them. It was slightly ajar, just enough to give a glimpse of the dim light that flickered inside. Forge motioned for them to stop. He didn't need to say anything. They all knew what was about to happen. With one swift motion, Forge pushed the door open, and they filed in, their eyes scanning the room for any sign of their target. The room was empty, save for a few crates and old machinery. But the girl's heart skipped a beat when she saw him. Donovan, standing in the far corner, his back to them, as if he'd been waiting for this moment all along. His face was cold, unreadable. When he turned to face them, his eyes locked with the girl's, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. The tension in the room was palpable. She had been running from this man for so long, and now, here he was, the man who had caused so much pain in her life. Forge stepped forward, his voice steady. "It's over, Donovan. You're not going to hurt her anymore." Donovan's eyes flickered to the other bikers, but he didn't move. "You think you could just walk in here and take me down?" He sneered, his tone cold. "You're out of your league, biker." The girl felt a surge of anger rise within her, but she didn't speak. Forge was the one who had the power here, not her. "Not yet. This isn't just about you anymore," Forge said, his voice low but filled with authority. "It's about justice, and we're not walking away until we get it." Donovan's lip curled into a sneer, but the girl could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." The bikers stood their ground, their eyes never leaving Donovan. "We know exactly what we're dealing with," Phantom said, her voice sharp. "You don't have control here. Not anymore." The girl watched as Donovan's jaw tightened, his hands balling into fists at his sides. For the first time, he seemed truly unsure of himself. The man who had always held the power over her, the one who had used his badge and his authority to make her feel small, was suddenly the one who seemed vulnerable. Forge stepped closer to him, his presence overwhelming. "You'll leave this girl alone. You'll stop coming after her. And if you don't, we'll make sure you can't hurt anyone ever again." Donovan's eyes narrowed, his lips twitching as if he were about to say something, but he stopped himself. For a moment, the silence hung between them like a thick fog. The girl felt the weight of it, but she also felt something else. A spark, a fire that had been smoldering for years, was finally igniting. Donovan took a step back, his eyes scanning the bikers, then the girl, then Forge. For the first time, he seemed to recognize that he had no power here. No control. He was alone. Slowly, almost begrudgingly, Donovan nodded, his eyes hardening. "You think this is over?" "It's just the beginning." Forge didn't flinch. "No, it's over. For good." With a final glare, Donovan turned and stalked toward the door, disappearing into the night. The room was still, the silence broken only by the sound of the bikers breathing, their resolve unshaken. The girl stood there, her chest rising and falling with each breath. It was over. Donovan was gone, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. The bikers were right. She wasn't alone anymore. They kept their promise. The girl wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. The bikers gathered around her, their faces softening as they realized the fight was over. Forge placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice calm but reassuring. "You're safe now." She nodded, her heart finally at ease. It wasn't just the end of a chase. It was the beginning of something new. And with the bikers by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. The night air was still, heavy with the weight of what had just happened. The girl stood with the bikers, the street lights casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. Her heart was racing, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was something else, something like freedom. She glanced over at Forge, who was standing a few feet away, talking quietly with Phantom. The bikers had done it. They had driven Donovan away. And in doing so, they had given her something she hadn't had in a long time: peace. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't the scared little girl who had been hiding from her stepfather's cruelty. She had a future now, and it was her own to shape. The silence between them was comfortable, but it was also heavy, the kind of silence that came after a battle had been won. The girl turned to the other bikers, each of them still standing tall, their faces calm but alert. They were more than just a group of people who had helped her. They were her family now, and she knew they would always have her back. Forge turned to her, his expression softening when he saw her looking at him. "You did good tonight," he said, his voice quiet but full of respect. "You're stronger than you think." The girl smiled faintly, the weight in her chest lightening just a bit. She wasn't sure what to say. Thank you felt too small for everything they had done for her. They had stepped in when no one else would. They had protected her. They had saved her. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. "You don't have to," Phantom said, walking over to join them. "We're a family. We take care of our own. You're one of us now." The girl felt a lump form in her throat, but she swallowed it down. She didn't need to speak. The look in Phantom's eyes and the way the other biker stood beside her was all the reassurance she needed. They weren't just words. They were a promise. "We're staying in town for the night," Forge said, his voice steady. "Get some rest. We'll figure out the next step tomorrow." The girl nodded, still in a bit of daze. Everything had happened so fast. One moment, she was running, trying to escape, and the next, she was standing here with these bikers, safe and sound. It didn't feel real. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Forge looked at her, a slight smile on his face. "We've got a place. It's safe. You can rest there tonight." The girl didn't question it. She was too tired to think about anything else. She didn't want to sleep, to let everything sink in. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her exhausted. She followed Forge and the others as they made their way to a small motel just outside town. It wasn't much, just a few rooms in a rundown building, but it was enough. It was a place where she could finally breathe. The bikers had already set up camp in the parking lot, each of them unpacking their gear and settling in for the night. The girl stayed close to Forge as they walked into the room, her feet aching from the long journey. The bed was small, but it didn't matter. It was a bed, and that was all she needed. She collapsed onto it, the soft sheets a relief against her tired body. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt safe. Forge stood by the door, watching her quietly. "Get some sleep," he said, his voice soft. "Tomorrow, we'll figure everything out. But for tonight, you're safe." She closed her eyes, the weight of everything finally catching up to her. She had made it. She was safe. The man who had haunted her for so long was gone. And for the first time, she allowed herself to relax. The bikers had kept their promise. She wasn't alone anymore. As the night passed, the girl drifted into a deep sleep, the quiet hum of the motel's old air conditioner a lullaby in the background. The chaos of the past few days seemed so far away, a distant memory. But she knew one thing for sure. Her life was never going to be the same again. She had a family now, a group of people who cared for her. And that, more than anything, was what made her feel truly safe. The morning light came too quickly, pulling her from her dreams. She stretched, feeling the soreness in her body from the long ride, but it didn't matter. She was alive. She was free, and with the bikers by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. Forge and Phantom were already awake, sitting at a small table near the window, talking in hushed tones. They looked up when she walked in, their expressions warm. "Morning," Forge said with a nod. "How are you feeling?" She smiled, feeling the weight of the past few days lift off her shoulders. "Better," she said, her voice steady. "Thank you for everything." Phantom waved her words away, her eyes sparkling with the same quiet strength Forge had shown the night before. "You don't need to thank us. We're a team now." The girl nodded, feeling a quiet peace settle over her. This was just the beginning. Whatever came next, she wasn't facing it alone. She had a family, and that was all she needed. The morning light was still dim as the girl sat up in bed, stretching her arms overhead. The night had passed quietly, the darkness finally giving way to a new day. The silence in the small motel room felt almost peaceful after the chaos of the last few days. She had spent so long running, so long hiding, that it was hard to adjust to the idea that she was safe now. She could hardly remember the last time she felt this calm. Forge and Phantom were already awake, quietly talking by the window. The air was thick with the smell of coffee, and the girl could see the faint outline of the sun rising outside. The world was waking up, but she felt like she had just stepped into a new chapter of her life. Forge looked over when he noticed her moving. "Morning," he said, his voice calm, but carrying a warmth she hadn't expected. "How are you doing?" She smiled faintly, still processing everything that had happened. "Better," she replied. "A lot better." It wasn't just about being physically safe anymore. She was starting to realize that the emotional scars of the past few years were beginning to heal. There was still a lot of work to do, but she no longer felt like a victim. She had made it out, and she wasn't alone. Phantom stood up and motioned for her to join them. "We got a lot to figure out," she said, her voice practical, yet there was an understanding in her eyes. "But for now, let's have some breakfast. You need to eat." The girl nodded. The promise of normalcy, however brief it might be, felt comforting. The bikers had made it clear that they would do whatever it took to keep her safe, but the world was still a dangerous place. She needed to get stronger. She needed to learn how to live again. As they sat down to eat, Forge and Phantom filled her in on their next steps. "We're going to head into town," Forge explained, his face serious. "We'll get some supplies, lay low for a bit, but we'll also keep an eye on things. Donovan's not just going to disappear." The girl felt a knot tighten in her stomach at the mention of her stepfather's name. She knew this wasn't over. Donovan had been a constant presence in her life, always looming in the background, always ready to strike. Even now, she could feel his eyes on her. But it wasn't just Donovan she had to worry about. She had to worry about what came next. "What do you think he's going to do?" she asked quietly, her voice betraying her uncertainty. "He'll try to come after you," Phantom said bluntly. "But we'll be ready." Forge nodded in agreement. "We don't back down from threats. We face them head on. That's how we've always done it." The girl looked at the two of them, their expressions hard but resolute. She felt a spark of something inside her, something like courage, something she hadn't known she had. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Phantom looked at her with an intensity that made her feel seen. "You keep going," she said. "You keep living. We'll take care of the rest. You don't have to fight this alone." The girl took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Phantom's words settle in her chest. It wasn't just the bikers who were keeping her safe. She was a part of this now, a part of their family. She wasn't going to let Donovan win. Not again. After breakfast, Forge stood up and grabbed his jacket, the others following suit. "All right," he said, his voice firm. "Let's get moving. We don't want to stay in one place for too long. We'll figure out our next steps once we're on the road." The girl followed them out of the motel room, her feet hesitant at first, but with each step, she felt a little more sure of herself. The bikers moved in sync, their steps purposeful as they made their way to the parking lot. The engines of their bikes roared to life, a sound that always filled her with a sense of purpose. The world outside the motel seemed brighter now, the weight of fear and uncertainty lifting from her shoulders just a little more with each passing moment. As she climbed onto the bike behind Forge, she realized that this was her life now. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She was living. The convoy of bikers roared down the road, the wind rushing past, the world moving around them. The girl felt a sense of freedom she hadn't known in years, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. She had no idea what the future held. She didn't know if Donovan would come back, or if the world would throw more challenges her way. But one thing was certain. She wasn't facing it alone. She had her family now, and they would protect her no matter what. The rest of the ride was spent in relative silence, the sound of the bikes and the wind filling the space. The girl watched the landscape blur by, the road ahead stretching out like an endless possibility. She had no idea where the road would lead them, but she knew she was ready to face it. The future was hers to claim, and with the bikers by her side, she knew nothing could stop her. The ride continued through the morning, the hum of the engines vibrating beneath her, filling the air with a steady rhythm. The girl, holding tightly to Forge's leather jacket, felt the cool breeze against her skin. The world around her seemed to blur, a tapestry of endless roads, open skies, and the feeling of freedom she hadn't dared to hope for in so long. Every mile they put behind them was one more mile away from Donovan, one more step toward a life she could finally control. They had stopped for fuel about an hour ago, and now they were heading out of the small town. Forge kept a steady pace, his eyes on the road ahead, his face focused and calm. The other bikers followed closely, their bikes roaring in unison, a show of strength and solidarity. The girl had been in the back of the pack, but now Forge motioned for her to move up, signaling for her to join him at the front. With a nervous but excited flutter in her chest, she shifted closer to him, feeling the wind rush past them, the world seeming to open up before her. As they moved down the highway, Forge turned his head slightly toward her, his voice low but clear. "We're going to keep moving, but we'll stay out of sight for a while. We don't know if Donovan's trying to track us, and I don't want to risk you getting caught in something we can't control." She nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. Every minute felt like a step into unknown territory, but with the bikers, she felt like she could handle whatever came next. They weren't just riding to escape anymore. They were riding to reclaim her life, to ensure she was safe, and to face whatever Donovan might throw at them. As the miles stretched on, the girl started to feel a strange calmness. She wasn't afraid anymore. Even though the unknown loomed ahead, even though Donovan might come after her again, she was no longer that helpless girl running from the past. She was part of something bigger now, a family, a team, and they would protect her. They didn't stop for much during the ride. Forge kept his eyes on the road. Phantom and the others stayed close, scanning the horizon and the road signs for anything unusual. The girl didn't ask questions. She just followed their lead, trusting them to guide her through this uncertain path. Finally, after several hours, Forge slowed the pace as they approached a small, secluded area off the main road. It wasn't much, just an abandoned building with a small parking lot, hidden by trees on one side and a thick wall of brush on the other. "This will do," Forge said, as he guided his bike into the lot. The other bikers followed suit, parking in a circle, their engines turning off one by one. The girl slid off the bike, her legs a little unsteady from the long ride. She felt the cool ground beneath her boots as she stood up straight, taking a deep breath. She hadn't realized how long it had been since she had been able to breathe freely. "We'll lay low for a while," Forge said, walking over to her. "Stay here, and don't worry. We'll figure out the next move soon. We'll keep you safe." The girl nodded, though there was still a small voice of doubt deep inside her. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe they could protect her. But she had lived with fear for so long that it was hard to let go completely. She walked a few steps away from the group, staring out at the trees, the vast emptiness of the world around her. She had never felt so small and so exposed, but at the same time, there was a feeling of relief. She wasn't running anymore. And as the bikers set up camp and got ready to settle in, Forge came over to her, his footsteps steady on the gravel. He stood beside her for a moment, both of them gazing out into the distance. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. The girl hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'm just thinking," she said quietly, "about everything." "I get it," Forge replied. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just take it one step at a time. We'll figure it out together." She gave him a small smile, feeling the weight on her shoulders lift just a little. The world was still uncertain, but the bikers were with her. They had her back, and for the first time in years, she wasn't alone. After a while, they set up their camp. The fire crackled in the center, casting a warm glow around the small group. The girl sat on the ground, her eyes on the fire, but her mind racing with everything that had happened. Forge, Phantom, and the others were gathered around, talking quietly, making plans for the next day. She could hear bits and pieces of their conversation, but she didn't interrupt. They had their own way of handling things, and for now, it was enough to know they were here with her. The bikers didn't need to say much. Their actions spoke louder than words. As the night wore on, the girl felt her exhaustion catch up to her. The long ride, the emotions, the fear, it was all catching up to her. She curled up on a blanket, the warmth of the fire keeping the chill at bay, and let her eyes close. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. She was with people who cared for her, and that was enough. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges, but for tonight, she allowed herself the rest she had been denied for so long. She wasn't running anymore. She was living, and that was a feeling she hadn't known she needed until now. The morning was quiet, but the stillness in the air felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. The girl woke slowly, her body sore from the long ride and the strain of everything that had happened in the past days. She sat up on the blanket, stretching her arms overhead and trying to shake off the exhaustion that had crept in during the night. The fire for the previous night had long since died down, leaving only a faint smell of smoke in the air. She could see the bikers moving around the camp, getting ready for the next leg of the journey. Forge and Phantom were talking near the fire pit, their voices low but urgent. The girl stood and walked over to them, feeling the weight of the moment press down on her. She wasn't sure what was coming next, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't running anymore. She was here with them, with her new family, and they would face whatever came next together. Forge glanced up as she approached, giving her a nod of acknowledgement. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady but still filled with a quiet strength. "How are you feeling?" She smiled faintly, the exhaustion still lingering, but there was a strength in her that hadn't been there before. "I'm okay," she replied, her voice steady. "Better than before." Forge's gaze softened slightly. "We're going to keep moving today. We'll stick to the back roads for now, stay off the main highways. Donovan isn't going to give up, and we need to stay ahead of him." The girl nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. Her stepfather wasn't going to stop. She could feel it in her bones. The bikers were doing everything they could to keep her safe, but it wasn't over yet. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face whatever came next, but she had no choice. She was stronger now. The bikers had made sure of that. Phantom spoke up then, her voice full of resolve. "We'll stay on the move. For now, but we need to get more information. We don't know what Donovan has planned, but we need to be ready for anything." The girl's heart tightened at the thought of her stepfather's next move. She knew he wasn't done. The feeling of being hunted, of being chased, had never really left her, and she knew it wouldn't be over until Donovan was behind bars. But she had the bikers with her now, and she wasn't alone. For the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope. Forge turned to her, his eyes serious. "We'll get you through this. We're not stopping until we know you're safe." She felt her throat tighten at his words. She had never known someone could be so steadfast, so committed to protecting someone else. It wasn't just about riding and fighting. It was about loyalty, and these bikers had shown her more loyalty than she had ever known. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. Forge nodded. "We're family now, and that's what family does. We protect each other." The girl smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had never known what it meant to truly be part of something, but now, with these people by her side, she felt like she finally belonged. She wasn't just a girl running from her past. She was part of a team, part of a group that wouldn't stop fighting until she was safe. Phantom finished packing up their camp, moving quickly but with a grace that came from years of experience. The other bikers are doing the same, their movements synchronized, as if they were preparing for something they knew was coming. The girl stood by, watching them, taking in their calm, controlled energy. They were ready for anything, and so was she. As the bikers mounted their bikes, the girl climbed onto Forge's bike once again, feeling the familiar hum beneath her. The engines roared to life as the group set off, the sound of their bikes echoing through the quiet morning. The girl felt the wind against her skin, the road stretching ahead of them like an open canvas. She didn't know where it would lead, but she knew she was ready. She was stronger than she had ever been. As they rode, the girl's mind raced. Donovan was still out there, and he wouldn't stop until he had her. But this time, she wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She had a family now, and with them by her side, she could face whatever came next. They kept to the back roads, their bikes cutting through the quiet countryside, the world around them peaceful but full of tension. The further they went, the more she could feel the weight of what was to come. She wasn't sure if Donovan would show up today or the next, but she knew the bikers were prepared. They would stand together no matter what. They had already proven that. The ride was long, but the girl didn't mind. It gave her time to think, to process everything that had happened. She had faced her fears, and with Forge and the bikers, she had won. She wasn't afraid of what came next, not anymore. She knew she wasn't alone, and for the first time in a long time, that thought gave her peace. The road stretched out before them, endless and quiet under the late afternoon sun. The girl sat behind Forge, the familiar hum of the bike beneath her a comforting presence. The wind, once a sharp reminder of fear, now felt like a welcome touch against her skin. She had come a long way in such a short time, and the weight she had been carrying for years seemed lighter now. She wasn't just running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She was facing her past, standing tall, and walking into her future with the bikers by her side. It had been days since they had driven Donovan away, but she knew the danger wasn't over. It was only a matter of time before he would try to make his move again. But this time, she wasn't afraid. She had learned something on this journey, something that went beyond surviving. She had learned to live. Forge glanced back at her as they rode, his expression soft but resolute. "We're almost there," he said. "We'll keep moving until we know for sure it's safe. We'll get you the peace you deserve." The girl nodded, the words settling in her chest. Peace. It was a word that had once seemed impossible, but now it felt attainable. They had fought hard to get to this point, and though there was still more ahead, she could see the path more clearly than ever before. The convoy of bikers rode in a loose formation, each of them focused on the road ahead, but always aware of each other's presence. It was like they were a part of the same heartbeat, one unit, and that unity gave her strength. She wasn't alone anymore. The sun began to dip below the horizon as they neared a quiet town. The buildings were old but well kept, the streets quiet except for the occasional sound of distant dog barking. It wasn't much, but it felt like a place to breathe. Forge slowed the bike as they approached the outskirts. "We're going to rest here for the night," he said. "We'll stay out of sight, regroup, and see what the next move is. But for now, we rest." The girl felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. It had been a long ride, filled with so much tension, so much uncertainty. But tonight, she could finally rest. The group stopped outside a small inn, the kind that had seen better days, but still felt welcoming in its simplicity. The bikers dismounted, their movements quick but practiced. Forge turned to her, his eyes serious but kind. "You've done well," he said. "We'll keep moving tomorrow, but tonight you're safe." She nodded, feeling the weight of those words. Safe. It was a word she hadn't used to describe her life in a long time, but now, with the bikers standing by her side, it felt true. The night passed quickly. The girl couldn't help but sleep deeply, the exhaustion finally catching up with her. When she woke up, The first rays of morning sunlight were creeping through the blinds, casting soft light on the room. She stretched, her body still sore, but a sense of peace had settled in her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was running away from something. She was moving forward, and that was a feeling she never thought she'd have again. After a quick breakfast, the bikers were back on the road. They were a tight-knit unit, moving as one. The girl stayed close to Forge, her confidence growing with each passing mile. They didn't speak much, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that came with understanding, the kind that came from being part of something bigger than yourself. Forge broke the quiet after a while, his voice calm, but with a hint of pride. "You're stronger than you know." She glanced at him, a small smile playing on her lips. "I know," she said, the words coming more easily now. They rode through the countryside, the trees and fields a blur of green and brown. The wind whipped past them, but this time the girl didn't feel lost. She felt in control, and the world around her felt like it was opening up. As the day wore on, the group made their way to a quiet town, the kind of place that didn't show up on most maps where no one asked questions. It was perfect. The bikers stopped at a diner on the edge of town, the kind that was faded but had that welcoming, worn charm. The girl climbed off the bike, her legs stiff from the long ride, but her heart felt light. For the first time, she realized she had a future again. The diner was small, but it felt like the perfect place to take a breath, to reflect. They sat at a booth, Forge across from her, the other bikers filling the seats around them. They were all quiet for a moment, eating and drinking their coffee, but the girl could sense the unspoken bond between them. She wasn't just a runaway anymore. She wasn't the scared girl hiding from her past. She was part of something, a family, and no matter what came next, she knew they would stand together. "So what now?" she asked, her voice a little quieter than she expected. Forge looked at her, his gaze steady but with a hint of warmth. "Now, we live," he said simply. "We keep moving forward, together." The girl smiled, feeling the truth of his words settle into her heart. The road ahead might still be uncertain, but with the bikers by her side, she was ready. Ready to face whatever came next. Ready to live. The future was hers to shape. And this time, she wasn't afraid. As they left the diner, the sun was beginning to dip behind the horizon, casting the world in a golden glow. The girl stood with the bikers, the weight of her